Well, there was a certain county agent who had an assignment to go out and to visit several farmers within his area. This very well could have happened down in southeast Kansas. And he got to one particular farmhouse, and he had to go in and he had to talk to the farmer about some new subsidies that might be available for him through the government. And so he drove up to the farmer's house, and he came to the gate that was right at the edge of the farmer's property, and the gate was closed, and there was a long driveway that went up to the house. And so he decided that he would just go ahead and get out of his car and walk up to the house. And so he did that, and he went around the gate, and he's walking up this gravel driveway to the house, and as he's walking along, he sees these signs that have been put along the way, signs that say things like, "Keep out," "Beware of the dog," "Trespassers will be shot." But he continues, and he gets to the door. And he knocks on the door, little trepidatiously, but he knocks on the door, and the farmer opens the door, and he has this broad smile on his face. And he says, "Well, come on in." And so he goes in, and he visits with the farmer, and he takes care of the business that he needs to do. And he's getting ready to leave, and the farmer looks him in the eye, and he says, "Please, come see me again. I don't get very many visitors up here." Is it any wonder? All of the signs would prepare you to expect a person that it's going to make it a very unpleasant visit. And I suspect that the only way a very determined person is going to continue that walk up to the house is if they sort of are willing to be challenged in that way. Most of us would turn around and go back to our cars. Welcome. You know, the word welcome is used 61 times in the Bible. And of those 61 times, it's only used twice in the Old Testament. Throughout the entire Old Testament, it's obvious that the people of God have tried their very best to keep themselves to themselves, to keep out the Gentiles. The Gentiles are anybody that's not a Jew, to keep themselves pure. The two times that the word welcome is used in the Old Testament is in 2 Kings and once in Isaiah, and it tell of a time when King Hezekiah was sick, and he welcomed envoys from Babylon into his palace. It was also the beginning of the end for King Hezekiah. So hardly an incentive for anybody to be welcoming within that time frame in that community. But the New Testament, especially when Jesus is talking, it tells a completely different story. Jesus says, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me." And he also goes on to say, "And whoever gives a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, who does that because they are a disciple of mine, truly I tell you, they will receive their reward." It seems to me that in order to be like Jesus, to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus, we too must be called to be welcoming. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Garrison Keillor. He is a storyteller, great storyteller on Prairie Home Companion, talks about Lutherans a lot. Anybody ever heard of him? Okay, well that helps a little bit. He's written some books also. One of the books that he wrote was called Leaving Home. Now, Garrison Keillor tells about a church in that book that split into two factions over some minor points of doctrine. One dispute they had to do with showing hospitality. Now, in this case, it was whether it was right or not to show hospitality to those who are in error concerning doctrine. And they had a name for this dispute. They called it the cup of cold water debate. Now, one of the leaders of the church, Uncle Al, decided that he was going to try to make peace between these two warring factions. And so he chose Brother Fields to help him with this. Now, Brother Fields had never shown hospitality to anyone in his life, whether they were right or not. And so he seemed perfect for the task. They all arrived one Sunday for Aunt Flo's famous fried chicken. And it was time for grace, and it posed a bit of a problem for them because church members were sometimes known to use prayer to beat up other people. And so Uncle Al suggested that perhaps they have a silent prayer this time. It was an excellent idea, except it turned out to be a contest between who could pray the longest. Brother Miller, who was the leader of one faction, snuck a glance at Brother Johnson, who was the leader of the other faction, and Brother Johnson showed no sign that he was about to end his prayer. And so Brother Miller dove right back down for some more prayer time too, and nobody was coming up for air because they thought it might look like they wanted to eat more than they wanted to pray. And it was becoming the longest table grace in history. And then without waiting for these men to finish their contest, good, practical Aunt Flo slid her chair back and she got up and she brought out the food that they were both competing to see who could be the most thankful for. And tears began to stream down Brother Johnson's face. Brother Miller was weeping also. The smell of fried chicken and gravy made their hearts begin to melt. And they raised their heads and they filled their plates, and slowly they began to make peace over that glorious meal. The cup of cold water debate. Should you show hospitality to someone whose doctrine is not sound? And the verse that they were fighting over was the verse that you heard me read earlier from another translation. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward. You see, at the time that Jesus walked the earth, people practiced hospitality, radical hospitality, welcoming, as if it were a virtue. The stranger was like a brother or a sister. The visitor had a place of honor. Water was not easy to come by. In rural areas, there was no access to running water. Women usually carried jars of water on their heads twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening, from wherever their water source was back to the homestead. There was no refrigeration, so cold water would not stay cold for very long. And to give a cup of cold water to someone was a real luxury. It would indicate a very high level of Mideastern hospitality. Now, in this country, I know that we've heard, or maybe we've even said, things about Southern hospitality. But there are some things about Mideastern hospitality that would put Southern hospitality to shame. There was an American journalist several years ago. His name is Afshan Malavi, and he traveled through Iraq. He was gathering information for a magazine article that he was going to write about the sweeping changes that were taking place in Iran. Now, the fear of terrorism causes us to look at Iranians with suspicion. I know that, and rightfully so at times. But Malavi reports that the Iranian people that he met were gracious and welcoming. In fact, the Iranians are famous for their hospitality to strangers. Malavi mentioned to his taxi driver that he would love to have a fresh cup of pomegranate juice that was sold by the local street vendors. And so without saying a word, the driver drove to the next stand that he could find, and he even insisted that he pay for the cup of pomegranate juice for this man. But the juice vendor, finding out that Malavi was a stranger to their community, insisted that he give it to him for free. And so the taxi driver and the fruit juice vendor had a friendly little fight back and forth as to who was going to pay for the juice for this visitor to their country. Visitors in that part of the country have reported those kinds of demonstrations of hospitality. They happen a lot. And that is what Jesus' expectation was of his disciples, because that's the culture that Jesus came from. And if anyone gives you even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, because he's my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will be rewarded, or she will be rewarded. And so what might it look like to be a welcoming person? What might it look like to be a welcoming community, a community of Peace Lutheran Church? Well, how many of you remember the first time you walked into this place? How did we do? Did we pass? I'm not asking anybody to answer that. Could we do better? Here are some thoughts that I have. What do you do when you're having a cup of coffee with your friends and a mother and her young son walk into the fellowship hall looking for somebody to help her? What do you do when you sit down in the pews? Do you sit on the end because you got there first? Or do you move to the middle so that there's space and welcoming for somebody else who might want to sit in that pew? What do you do when you notice, and you Lutherans, you know this, what do you do when you find out that the first person the ushers are going to send to communion is somebody who's never been here before, and they don't have a clue how we do communion, because we know we do it different in every church? What do you do if you notice that? What do you do when you see somebody sitting beside you or behind you or in front of you and you don't know who they are? You've never met them before. What do you do when a homeless man comes into our community or sits down in our fellowship hall for a cup of coffee? Jesus expects us to be hospitable. Jesus expects all of his followers to be hospitable. Our mission for this week. In fact, that's the mission for our entire lives. If we are a disciple of Jesus Christ, our mission is to give a drink of cold water to somebody else and to let them know you're doing it because of Jesus. Now, it might not be a cup of cold water. It might be a friendly smile. It might be a meal. It might be something that they need. It might be directions. Whatever it is, our mission, our goal, our objective as disciples of Jesus Christ is to give them that, to be friendly, to be welcoming, and to let them know why. Because we follow Jesus. Amen.